Welcome back, everyone, to the Complete Aviation Solutions Deep Dive number 22. Today we're going to be taking a look at some of the latest developments in the world of aviation. We've got a lot to cover, so let's just jump right in.
Sounds good to me.
So let's start our journey in Greenland, where Air Greenland is getting ready to launch a service to their brand new airport in Ilulissat. They're going with an Airbus A320neo to service the route. But there's a twist. They're opting to lease the aircraft instead of buying it directly from Airbus.
That's interesting, especially considering the long wait times for new aircraft these days. It seems like a smart move to take advantage of the new airport opening without being held back by those delivery delays that could last for years.
Yeah, exactly. It also makes you wonder if this is a sign of a larger trend in the industry. Are we going to see more airlines using leasing as a way to deal with these kind of unpredictable times?
It's certainly possible. Leasing gives airlines a flexibility that buying just doesn't. They can change their fleets more easily based on things like changes in demand, or even try out new routes without having to make a huge investment up front.
That makes a lot of sense. It's like testing the waters before you jump in. But, on the other hand, imagine being a pilot for Air Greenland who's used to flying turboprops like the Dash 8, and suddenly you're at the controls of a sophisticated A320neo.
Yeah, that's quite a change. It really shows how important it is for pilots to be adaptable and have a lot of different skills in today's aviation world. Airlines are using more and more different types of aircraft, and pilots need to keep up with those changes.
Absolutely. And speaking of making changes, let's head over to Iceland, where Play Airlines is doing something a little different with their fleet. They're wet leasing 3 of their Airbus narrow-body aircraft to another European airline until the end of 2027.
Now, for those who may not be familiar with the term, wet leasing basically means that Play is leasing out these aircraft. And that includes the crew, the maintenance, and even insurance to another airline. It's a way for airlines to make money from aircraft that they're not using, especially when demand is low.
It's kind of like renting out your car when you're not using it, but on a much, much larger scale. Given that Play has had some financial issues recently, this seems like a really smart way to make the most of their resources.
Definitely. It's a classic example of an airline changing its strategy to respond to the market. They're focusing on their most profitable routes and using wet leasing as a way to be as efficient as possible and minimize any losses.
It makes you wonder, though, who is this mysterious European airline that's leasing Play's aircraft?
Right.
Could it be an airline that's seen a sudden increase in demand and needs to quickly boost its capacity?
That's a great question. It really shows how connected the global aviation network is. One airline's problem can become another airline's opportunity. And sometimes those opportunities can lead to some interesting partnerships.
Now let's shift gears and go to Nigeria, where there's some good news for the country's airlines. They're no longer on the leasing blacklist, which was a big problem for airlines that wanted to expand their fleets.
This is a big deal for Nigerian aviation. Being on that blacklist meant that leasing companies were afraid to do business with Nigerian airlines. It made it hard for them to get new aircraft. This removal shows that there's a renewed confidence in Nigeria's aviation sector.
It's a victory for airlines like United Nigeria Airlines, which have big plans for growth. Now they can access a much wider range of aircraft, which could mean new routes, lower fares, and a boost to the Nigerian economy.
It's a perfect example of how changes in regulations can have a ripple effect across an entire industry, and that can lead to growth and development.
Speaking of development, let's head to Pakistan, where the government is speeding up its plans to privatize Pakistan International Airlines, or PIA. They're aiming to sell it off by June 2025, but it hasn't been easy so far.
No, it hasn't. Privatizing a national airline is complicated. It often involves political factors, financial hurdles, and even national pride. PIA has had its fair share of challenges, including a past attempt at privatization that failed.
They're trying to make it more appealing this time by getting rid of a large amount of PIA's debt, which makes sense. But the question is, will that be enough to attract a buyer?
We'll have to see. Potential investors will be looking closely at PIA's financial situation, how efficiently it operates, and even its reputation. It's a high-stakes game. And the outcome will have a lasting effect on Pakistan's aviation industry.
And while we're on the topic of PIA, let's not forget about their planned return to London's Heathrow Airport, which seems to be facing a little bit of a delay.
It looks like PIA has leased their weekly slot pairs to Saudia for the summer season, which suggests that their return to Heathrow might be later than they initially thought.
This delay just goes to show how complicated the whole process of regulatory approvals and slot allocations is at major airports. Even for well-established airlines, navigating these processes can be like trying to get through a really complex air traffic control system.
It's interesting how one airline's delay can create an opportunity for another. Saudia getting those slots allows them to expand at Heathrow, and that could potentially change the competition in that very profitable market.
Now, before we head down under, we need to talk about Alaska Air Group. and there are expected delays in getting both Boeing 737 MAX and 787-9 aircraft.
These delays really highlight the problems that Boeing has been having with its supply chain and production. It's a situation that doesn't just affect Alaska Airlines, but also many other airlines around the world that are depending on Boeing deliveries to grow their fleets.
Initially, they were expecting 12 737-8s and 11 737-10s in 2025, but now those numbers are uncertain. And even with the delays, Alaska Air Group is still planning to significantly increase the size of its fleet in the next few years, reaching 449 aircraft by 2027.
That's ambitious. It shows that they're confident about the future of air travel, but these delays from Boeing do add a level of uncertainty to their plans. It's like planning a long flight and finding out that your plane might be grounded for maintenance longer than you expected. You need a backup plan.
Speaking of long flights, let's jump across the globe to Australia, where Virgin Australia and Qatar Airways are making headlines with their proposed alliance.
Right. This alliance, if it's approved, would give Virgin Australia a big boost in terms of its international reach, allowing it to tap into Qatar Airways' extensive network across Europe, the Middle East, and Africa.
But of course, not everyone's happy about it. Some people are worried about what this could mean for competition, especially since Qatar Airways already has an alliance with Qantas.
It's a reminder that airline alliances can be a good and a bad thing. They can offer passengers more travel choices and maybe even lower fares, but they can also lead to worries about less competition and the possibility of airlines working together to keep prices high.
It'll be interesting to see what the Australian Competition and Consumer Commission decides. They're looking into the proposed alliance right now, and their decision could really change things for Australia's aviation industry.
It's a complex issue. There are no easy answers. The ACCC has to balance the potential benefits of the alliance against the risks to competition and ultimately make a decision that's in the best interest of Australian consumers.
While the ACCC is thinking things over, let's turn our attention to another airline that's making waves, Fly Dubai. They're reportedly talking about getting a huge number of new narrow-body aircraft.
We're talking about an order that could be over 200 aircraft. With options for another 100, that's a bold move. It shows that Fly Dubai wants to become a major player in the global aviation world.
Wow, that is a massive order. It makes you wonder if this is just the next step in their plan for growth? Or are they trying to take advantage of a unique opportunity in the travel boom after the pandemic?
Probably a bit of both. Fly Dubai has been expanding its operations steadily, and this order could be a strategic way to strengthen its position in a market that's changing quickly. But it also reflects a broader trend of airlines betting big on the future of air travel, even with all the challenges and uncertainties ahead.
And it's not just Fly Dubai that's expanding in the Middle East.
You're right.
We're seeing similar things from airlines like Etihad Airways, Qatar Airways, and the new kid on the block, Riyadh Air, all of which are said to be considering big orders for wide-body jets.
It seems like the Middle East is becoming a real hub for aviation activity with their locations that connect to continents and their growing economies. It's no surprise that airlines in the region are looking to capitalize on the increasing demand for air travel.
For sure, it raises some interesting questions about what will happen with aviation hubs in the future. Could we see a power shift, with Middle Eastern airports challenging the dominance of places like London Heathrow or Dubai International?
That's an interesting thought. It's like watching a new group of stars forming in the aviation sky.
It also makes me think about the environmental impact of all this growth. Can the industry keep up with its sustainability goals while expanding so rapidly?
That's the big question. While airlines are investing in aircraft that use less fuels and exploring alternative fuels, the sheer size of these fleet expansions makes it a tough challenge to reduce aviation's carbon footprint.
It's definitely a balancing act, and one that we'll need to pay close attention to as the industry figures out its future. But for now, let's go back to something we talked about earlier, the proposed alliance between Virgin Australia and Qatar Airways.
Yeah, the partnership that has some people in Australia a little worried. It's an alliance that could change how competitive the Australian aviation market is.
So for those who might have missed it, can you remind us what's causing all the buzz about this particular alliance?
Sure. The alliance, if it gets approved, would make Qatar Airways Virgin Australia's only partner in the Middle East and Turkey, and Virgin Australia would do the same for Qatar Airways in Australia. This means they'd work together on things like flight schedules, pricing, and loyalty programs.
Sounds like they'd be pretty close. But I imagine not everyone is thrilled about this, right?
You're right. The Australian Competition and Consumer Commission, or ACC, is concerned that this alliance could limit competition on certain routes, which could lead to higher fares for travelers.
I see. So are they likely to stop this deal?
It's tough to say for sure. The ACCC is looking at it carefully. And their decision could go either way. They need to balance encouraging collaboration that could benefit consumers and preventing monopolies that could hurt them.
It's like walking a tightrope between cooperation and competition. And whatever the ACC decides will have a big impact on air travel in Australia. But speaking of balancing acts, let's move on to another airline that's facing a different kind of challenge. Pakistan International Airlines, or PIA.
PIA. They've been through a lot in recent years. Financial problems, operational issues, and now a new push for privatization.
It seems like they're trying to get back on track, but it's a long and winding road. Remind us what's happening with PIA's efforts to privatize.
The Pakistani government is really determined to sell PIA by June 2025. They're hoping to attract private investors who can bring in much-needed money and expertise, but it's proving to be a difficult task.
They've tried this before, haven't they? What makes them think it'll work this time?
Well, they're trying to make PIA more attractive to potential buyers by removing a lot of its debt, which is a smart move. But we don't know if that will be enough to overcome the airline's long-standing challenges and convince investors that PIA has a good future.
It's a big gamble.
Yeah.
And the outcome will affect the entire aviation industry in Pakistan. But for now, let's take a quick detour to Iceland and check back in with Play Airlines. We talked about their wet leasing strategy earlier, but let's dive a bit deeper into their financial situation.
Okay.
Play has been open about their financial struggles. They reported a significant loss in 2024. They're working on streamlining their operations, optimizing their network, and of course using wet leasing agreements to boost their revenue.
Sounds like they're doing everything they can to get through this turbulence, but is it enough for them to survive in the long term in such a competitive market?
That's a good question.
Play's CEO is still optimistic. He's emphasizing their new flight schedule and focus on profitable routes, but only time will tell if their efforts will lead them to profitability.
It just shows that the airline industry is constantly changing, and airlines need to adapt quickly if they want to stay in the game. Speaking of adapting, let's go back to Greenland and look again at Air Greenland's decision to lease an Airbus A320neo for their new route to Ilulissat.
The leasing dilemma. It's a trend we're seeing more and more in the industry as airlines deal with long wait times for new aircraft and the need for more flexibility in how they manage their fleets.
It's like a puzzle. Airlines have to juggle aircraft availability, route planning, and financial considerations. But it also raises questions about the future of aircraft manufacturing.
It does.
The long lead times for new aircraft are putting pressure on Boeing and Airbus to increase production and make their supply chains more efficient. It's a challenge that will affect the industry for many years to come. And speaking of challenges, let's head back to Nigeria and take another look at the recent decision to take the country's airlines off the leasing blacklist.
This is a positive step that could open up a lot of growth potential for Nigerian aviation. But it's important to remember that there are still challenges.
Like what?
Well, even though being removed from the blacklist is a big improvement, Nigerian airlines still face obstacles related to infrastructure regulation and getting financing. It's a process that will require continued effort and collaboration between the government, airlines, and everyone involved in the industry.
It reminds us that progress in the aviation industry is rarely a straight line. It's more like a winding road with twists, turns, and unexpected detours.
That's what makes it so interesting. The aviation industry is a dynamic, constantly changing ecosystem, and we're just observers analyzing the forces that shape it.
Well said. And as we keep exploring this ever-changing landscape, let's turn our attention to a topic that's been creating a lot of buzz: the rise of new airlines in the Middle East.
Yes, the Middle Eastern aviation boom. It's a region full of ambition, with airlines like Riyadh Air making a grand entrance and established carriers like Etihad and Qatar Airways expanding even more.
It's like a new chapter in the story of aviation. But with all this growth and expansion, what does it mean for the future of air travel, both in the region and globally?
That's a question that will keep us thinking as we explore the trends that are shaping the aviation landscape.
Okay, so let's take a closer look at one of the key players in this Middle Eastern aviation drama, Fly Dubai.
We've talked about their big order for narrow-body aircraft, but what's the reason behind this move? What are they trying to do?
Yeah, what's the big picture here?
Well, Fly Dubai has been quietly building a name for itself as a kind of hybrid carrier, offering both low-cost and full-service options. This expansion could mean they want to compete more directly with both budget airlines and the big traditional carriers, not just in the Middle East, but on a global scale.
It's a bold move, especially in such a competitive industry. It's almost like a chess game with each airline trying to outsmart the others.
Exactly, and this massive order could be Fly Dubai's way of showing their strength, a signal to the industry that they're here to stay and ready to play at a higher level.
But with great expansion comes great responsibility. right? We can't ignore the environmental impact of adding so many new aircraft.
You're right, the environmental impact of aviation is a big concern. And Fly Dubai, like all airlines, needs to show that they're committed to sustainable practices as they grow. This could mean investing in more fuel-efficient aircraft, looking into alternative fuels, and implementing programs to offset their carbon emissions.
It's a challenge that the whole industry is facing. Balancing growth with environmental responsibility isn't easy.
No, it's not. It's a balancing act for sure, but it's one that every airline has to do if we want a future where aviation can connect the world without harming the planet.
Absolutely. Well said. So let's go back to a topic we talked about earlier, the proposed alliance between Virgin Australia and Qatar Airways.
Ah, yes, the partnership that has some people in Australia feeling a bit uneasy. It's an alliance that could really change the competitive landscape of the Australian aviation market.
So for those who might not remember, can you remind us what's all the fuss about with this alliance?
Okay, so the alliance, if it gets the go-ahead, would make Qatar Airways Virgin Australia's exclusive partner in the Middle East and Turkey. And Virgin Australia would do the same for Qatar Airways in Australia. This means they'd be working together on things like scheduling, pricing, and loyalty programs.
So they'd be pretty closely linked. But I bet that's not sitting well with everyone, is it?
You're right about that. The Australian Competition and Consumer Commission, the ACC, is worried that this alliance could reduce competition on some routes, which could mean higher fares for passengers.
That makes sense. So do you think they'll try to stop this deal?
Hard to say for sure. The ACCC is looking at it very carefully, and they could decide either way. It's a tricky situation. They need to encourage collaboration that could be good for consumers, but also prevent monopolies that could be bad for them.
It's a delicate balance. And the ACCC's decision will have a big impact on air travel in Australia. Speaking of balancing acts, let's shift our focus to another airline facing a different kind of challenge, Pakistan International Airlines, or PIA.
Ah, yes, PIA. They've had a bumpy ride in recent years, financial problems, operational issues, and now this push for privatization.
It seems like they're trying to turn things around, but it's not going to be easy. So remind us, what's the latest on PIA's privatization efforts?
The Pakistani government is determined to sell PIA by June 2025. They're hoping to find private investors who can bring in some much-needed cash and expertise, but it's not an easy sell.
Yeah, it sounds like it. They've tried this before, right? What makes them think this time will be different?
Well, they're hoping to make PIA more attractive to buyers by taking away a big chunk of its debt, which is a smart move, but it remains to be seen if that will be enough to overcome the airline's long-standing issues and convince investors that PIA has a good future ahead of it.
It's a big gamble with a lot at stake. The outcome will affect the whole aviation industry in Pakistan. But for now, let's take a quick detour to Iceland and circle back to Play Airlines. We discussed their wet leasing strategy earlier, but let's dig a little deeper into their financial situation.
Sure.
Play has been very open about their financial troubles, reporting a significant loss in 2024. It sounds like they're trying to streamline their operations, make their network more efficient, and, of course, using those wet leasing agreements to bring in more revenue.
It seems like they're doing everything they can to weather the storm.
Right.
But is it enough to guarantee their survival in the long run in such a competitive market?
That's the question, isn't it?
Play's CEO seems optimistic. He's highlighting their revised flight schedule and their focus on profitable routes. But we'll have to wait and see if those efforts will be enough to get them back on track financially.
It's a good reminder that the airline industry is always changing, and airlines need to adapt quickly if they want to survive. And on that note, let's head back up north to Greenland and look again at Air Greenland's decision to lease an Airbus A320neo for their new route to Ilulissat.
Ah, yes, the leasing question. It's a trend we're seeing more and more these days as airlines face those long wait times for new planes and need more flexibility in managing their fleets.
It's like a giant puzzle where airlines have to consider things like aircraft availability, route planning, and of course the financial side of things. It makes you wonder about the future of aircraft manufacturing as well.
You're right.
Those long lead times are putting pressure on companies like Boeing and Airbus to ramp up their production and streamline their supply chains.
Absolutely.
It's a challenge that will shape the industry for years to come. And speaking of challenges, let's touch down in Nigeria again and revisit the recent news about Nigerian airlines being taken off the leasing blacklist.
That's definitely good news. A positive step that could lead to a lot of growth for Nigerian aviation. But it's important to remember that challenges still exist.
What kind of challenges are we talking about?
Well, even though they're off the blacklist, Nigerian airlines still have to deal with issues like infrastructure regulations and access to funding. It's a journey that requires constant effort and collaboration from the government, airlines, and everyone involved in the industry.
It shows that progress in aviation isn't always straightforward. There are often twists and turns along the way.
For sure. It's what keeps things interesting. The aviation industry is dynamic, always evolving. and we're here to observe and analyze the forces that shake it.
Well put. As we continue our exploration of this ever-changing world, let's turn our attention to a topic that's been generating a lot of buzz: the rise of new airlines in the Middle East.
It's an exciting time for aviation in that region.
It really is.
We're seeing this Middle Eastern aviation boom, with airlines like Riyadh Air making a grand entrance and established players like Etihad and Qatar Airways expanding their reach even further.
It's like we're watching a new chapter unfold in the story of aviation. But with all this growth, what does it mean for the future of air travel, both in the region and around the world?
That's a great question, one that we'll keep exploring as we delve deeper into the trends shaping the world of aviation.
So let's focus on one of the key players in this Middle Eastern aviation scene, Fly Dubai.
They've placed this huge order for narrow-body aircraft, but what's the strategy behind such a bold move? What are they aiming for?
What's the bigger picture here?
Well, Fly Dubai has been carving out a niche for itself as a sort of hybrid carrier. They offer both low-cost and full-service options, and this expansion could be a sign that they want to compete more directly with both budget airlines and those big traditional carriers, not just in the Middle East, but globally.
That's a pretty ambitious plan, especially in such a competitive industry. It's almost like they're playing a game of chess, trying to outmaneuver everyone else.
Exactly. And this huge order could be Fly Dubai's way of making a power play, showing the industry that they're here to stay and ready to play at a bigger table.
But with such big expansion comes big responsibility, right? We can't forget about the environmental impact of an order this size.
Absolutely. The environmental impact of aviation is a major concern these days, and Fly Dubai, like all airlines, will need to show a real commitment to sustainability as they grow. This might mean investing in more fuel-efficient aircraft, exploring alternative fuels, and putting programs in place to offset their carbon emissions.
It's a challenge that the entire industry is facing, how to balance growth with environmental responsibility. It's no easy task.
It's a tough balancing act for sure, but it's one that every airline needs to make if we want a future where aviation can connect the world without harming the planet.
Well said, and I think that's a good point to wrap up our whirlwind tour of the aviation industry.
We've covered a lot of ground today, from Greenland to Australia, Pakistan to Nigeria, and of course the busy skies of the Middle East.
It's been quite a journey exploring all the challenges, opportunities, and trends that are shaping the world of aviation.
And if there's one thing we can take away from our deep dive today, it's this: the aviation industry is constantly changing, adapting to new realities, and pushing the boundaries of what's possible.
And as passengers, we get to see these changes firsthand, whether it's boarding a brand new aircraft, experiencing a smooth connection through an airline alliance, or just enjoying the convenience and wonder of air travel.
So next time you're at the airport looking out at the planes, remember, you're not just watching planes take off and land, you're seeing a dynamic industry in action, always changing, innovating, and connecting the world in ways we never thought possible.
And that's a wrap for this edition of the Complete Aviation Solutions Deep Dive. Until next time, keep your eyes on the skies, your ears tuned to the latest aviation news, and your minds open to the endless possibilities of flight.